I want to go ahead and welcome everybody to this data deep dive, and those are online. Thank you for joining us. Reminding this is being recorded, and we're going to put this on our YouTube channel for others to catch up. Here we are today, data deep dive in this changing environment in the downtown of San Francisco. This has been brought to you by Kilroy and the Academy of Sciences, Cal Academy, both two great sponsors and board members of the Chamber of Commerce. So as we look at this ever-changing, and we're continuing to have conversations through this recovery, where the downtown is going to go, where we're at, we thought we'd take an opportunity to look at the data, to compare it potentially to other cities, other areas, and maybe dispel some rumors about where we're headed, and confirm some rumors of where we're headed. But this is certainly an interesting time for all of us. So we're happy to have Kate Zeller, Senior Research Analyst with JLL with us, Alexandra Quinn, Director of Research for Northern California with JLL, and John Bryant with BOMA, CEO, here with us today. We're going to start off with JLL to give us the lay of the land, and they have been doing a tremendous amount of research and tracking vacancies, occupancies, sales, etc. So I'm going to pass it off over to Kate.
Hi, everyone.
The one on the left.
Yeah, it was perfect. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to start just talking about some economic indicators and some employment trends. This first chart is showing our previous recession employment recoveries compared to COVID-19. One of the things that we are watching here is potentially entering into a new economic cycle driven by the Fed's rate hikes over the past few months. One thing to note here, just for comparison to the US overall, if this chart was US employment, essentially our lines for the financial crisis, which is this tan line on the left versus this dark line, which is .com. Those pretty much look like they're flipped in the US charts. COVID-19, we obviously saw a significant initial decline in employment and have seen since then, especially in 2023, kind of a mixed bag in terms of recoveries in San Francisco. And now we sit about 1.2% below our February 2020 levels. In terms of net employment, so this is just total month-over-month growth for the city and county of San Francisco. We saw, along with most other major areas, a significant drop-off in employment in January. Since then, in February and March, we've regained most of those figures, though we're still below our previous numbers. Looking here at labor force recovery, we get a lot of questions about San Francisco in comparison to the greater New York area. So we took a chance to look at labor force recovery. So this is similar to that first chart where we're showing our labor force growth relative to pre-pandemic levels. So that's February 2020. Looking at San Francisco, that is just the city and county, and then Silicon Valley, that's Santa Clara County. Clearly ahead of the greater New York area, though they have made some significant increases in the last few months. The Valley and San Francisco are essentially recovered by this point. Obviously, Silicon Valley is above their pre-pandemic levels now. Another thing to note is our total labor force figures just within San Francisco. Normally, we look at labor force across the entire Bay Area, but just to be a little bit more kind of focused today, we're just looking at the city and county of San Francisco. March 2023 is our highest we've ever seen through the pandemic. Only a few thousand participants below July 2019. These are numbers that I would say counteract some of the talking points that we've seen recently in terms of people leaving San Francisco, coming back to the Bay Area. Whether these people are living within San Francisco is another part of the equation, but the participation that we've been seeing within the city and those that are looking for employment within San Francisco has seen a significant increase, especially year over year compared to March of last year and our pre-pandemic levels. Another major kind of point for San Francisco, obviously, is the city still is the top venture capital market in the world. This year, a big part of that is due to OpenAI's major $10 billion raise in January. But even without that raise, the city would still be the largest market in the country and the globe overall. Some return to office figures as well. We've been looking a lot at Castle Badge Live data. This is kind of the leading data source for office occupancy. So these figures on the left are comparing office occupancy in this previous week. So that's May 4th through the 10th, compared to that same week in 2019. A little bit confusing. This chart here is really showing that spread between our highest occupancy days and our lowest occupancy days across all of our major markets. So this right here is San Francisco. This is the metro of San Francisco. So this includes Oakland and San Mateo County, just above the top market average in terms of our spread between our highest and lowest days. Something to note here is that these other kind of major markets, Chicago and New York, have some of the largest spreads and have consistently had some of the largest spreads between their highest and lowest days of 35 to 40 percentage point differences. Another thing to note here too is our highest and lowest days have been consistently Tuesday and Friday for about 3 months. And then according to Castle's kind of their top markets, the total return to office figure is at 49% and has been for at least the past 2 months, varying slightly, but not significantly. We've also been looking at regional migration. So this is Census Bureau data at the county level, just looking at the international versus net migration by market. And something to note here is a significant increase in over 170% in international migration from 21 to the first half of last year. As a major market, the Bay Area consistently relies on international migration to backfill for positive population growth. So even just seeing an entire calendar year being less than half of just the first half of last year in terms of international migration to San Francisco and the greater Bay Area is really significant. The net migration, which is the chart on the right, is something else to note. Like I said, as a major market, we do see negative net migration consistently, especially when we're looking at just domestic movement. Some people might have seen the U.S. Post Office, their change of address data. We've been seeing that a lot as well, and that is domestic only. One thing to note there, something to note there is that every major metro in the country is seeing a similar trend regardless of their total net migration, where people are leaving the denser, more city environments to the suburban areas surrounding those same metros. So we're not seeing as much metro to metro migration. It's more from the city to the surrounding suburban areas. Taking a look at car traffic. Some people who have driven into the city recently have probably noticed that our traffic levels are pretty much back to where they were pre-pandemic. The Bay Bridge specifically is almost 92% of its pre-pandemic levels. So that's April 2019 to just last month. Two reasons why we're likely seeing this and not seeing a transit increase as well is partially due to a hesitancy to get back on public transportation, but we're also thinking that that could be a result of a higher tolerance when people aren't commuting into their jobs 5 days a week anymore. There's a higher tolerance for a longer commute if they're only coming in 2 or 3 days a week. Looking at bar traffic, unsurprisingly, this is we are still pretty low. San Francisco is about 35% of what it was in April 2019. And of those exits, those station exits, those along Market Street, so that's Civic Center down to the Embarcadero, are still among the lowest at 34%. Interestingly enough, the Mission stations are leading the city overall in terms of recovery, at 42.5%. One of the things that we look at a lot with retail specifically is deployments versus Union Square foot traffic. So we use a lot of Placer AI data, especially when we're looking at activity in Union Square, which a lot of people know has been challenged even before the pandemic. One thing that we've seen especially is that as deployments at SFO increase, that correlation with Placer AI activity, that foot traffic in Union Square also increases. So pretty high correlation value of 0.81. One thing we also know is that the Asian tourism market specifically is a major driver for Union Square spending, which also has a high correlation. This is Asian and Middle East deployments into SFO versus our foot traffic figures. Lastly, another piece from Placer. This is an analysis that they do comparing foot traffic specifically for domestic tourism, foot traffic in April of this year versus April 2019. Each of these neighborhoods below are at the zip code level. And it's really just showing that there are certain South financial districts, it tends to be an outlier here. We're chalking that mostly up to the fact that aren't a consistent number of conventions and events happening at Moscone Center year over year. But when we look at other areas like the Presidio, Nova, and Hayes Valley, areas that surround Golden Gate Park, major outdoor areas in the city, we're seeing a pretty significant recovery, with the Presidio being more than twice in terms of activity, more than twice what it was pre-pandemic. Foot traffic around the city as well, according to Placer, is about 70% of what it was in 2019. And something else to notice here as well is that we have there's more of a spread in terms of where tourism is and that activity. We're seeing, like I said, a lot more in the more outdoor focused park areas, but we're also seeing more activity in neighborhoods, the Marina, the Mission, and the greater area of Fisherman's Wharf and North Beach have seen significant increases as well. And I'll pass it to Gordon.
Thanks, Kate. Just a upload on where we are at Q1. The numbers aren't great. So you probably in the conversation right there. Now, I just stated we're at 700,000 square feet of leasing. Vacancies now at 26%. We're seeing some interesting recovery on the side of tenant requirements that I'll speak to. But at this very moment, the office condition, we are the highest vacancy of any office market, major market that we cover in the US right now. In terms of that vacancy, where that sits, it sits a lot in mid-market, which you would expect, but it's also in SOMA, Showplace Square. Again, Showplace Square is mainly Airbnb. That's where that is. In terms of where we compare, I already said this is the change over time. So San Francisco is now ahead of Houston in terms of total vacancy, and a 20 percentage point increase from where we started in Q4 of 2019. Mid-Peninsula, which is San Mateo County, that's on the lower end. Mid-Peninsula, because it has more of a life science market, has not been impacted as much. We're at 14%. Or even if you took the Valley, for example, that's at 17%. We saw positive net absorption last quarter, which is fascinating to us. Usually there's a strict correlation between San Francisco vacancy, Mid-Penn and Silicon Valley vacancy. We see this incredible difference just within this period. This just looks at vacancy over or leasing activity over time. Only thing I would say about this is since the pandemic, we've been averaging about 1.2 million square feet a quarter. We got around 800,000 this last quarter, so low. We want that number to get more into the 1.8 to 2 million to stabilize so that we'd be at a neutral vacancy rate. So in other words, vacancy is not climbing. In terms of where that leasing activity is occurring, it was down the most actually in the CBD last quarter. That's really an anomaly. Mostly we've been seeing that the SOMA, the Showplace Square, so outside of the core areas have done worse, and the core areas have fared better, but not this quarter. Not this last 4 quarters. It's kind of a surprise. But there is a highlight here. If you are looking for high-rise space, rents are in fact higher than they were Q4 of 2019. Everything else, rents are down. But if you are 30 or above 30 floors, rents, net effective rents, so these are deals that have happened, are up roughly 2%, whereas everything else is down 1%. This is sublease activity, stubbornly high. Sublease space are companies that are leasing space that they otherwise would have occupied. And the Salesforces of the world, the Slacks of the world, the Airbnb of the world, the Splunks of the world, all of them have added space to the market, and that's created this significant injection of inventory. And really, we are the anomaly. I would say one thing that's different is we've seen all of these cities increase in their total sublease activity. So maybe San Francisco was more the canary in the coal mines, and the other cities are starting to experience it now too. And just one thing I want to bring up, and it's a little bit hard to think about, but there's a question being asked lately is, when does the office market break in San Francisco? Or how much buildings are we really worried about going back to the bank? So there's no perfect measurement, and it's going to be building by building. So this is but we wanted to get a scale. What we're thinking is, if you bought your building or you did not refinance prior to 2015, you're probably okay. If you're after 2015, you're more likely to have risk associated with the basis of your property, vis-a-vis, your loan. So it's about 48% of office buildings in terms of inventory have been either sold or refinanced since 2015. So that is what we consider our risk pool, of which only a share of those will actually get foreclosed on. And if you want to just give a historic view of foreclosures, if you went back to the financial crisis, didn't in fact impact San Francisco, but the market overall, we saw roughly 10% going to special servicing during 2012. So we're not going to get to 48%. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think we will get to a share of these buildings will go to special servicing. What we're also seeing is this transformation back to the old school of San Francisco. So it used to be San Francisco had migrated more towards tech. Now we're seeing our tenant requirements are more in professional services and legal. So our mix is going back to what we were in 2005 and 2007 versus what we were experiencing after what I consider the Twitter tax break era, which is when we started to see an injection of tech space into our market. That is changing because of one thing, and you guys are probably reading a lot about this, artificial intelligence, which is highly anchored and concentrated in San Francisco. Obviously, OpenAI got $10 billion. They're in the mission. We're seeing a number of significant requirements, but if you look at share of funding, about 70% of the AI companies that have been founded since 2021 are in the Bay Area. A huge market share. And that implies to us a real opportunity, Anthropic, inflection. We've also seen our tenant requirements of the AI side go up by 50%. In other words, those that are looking for space, the AI companies, we've seen an increase of around 50% in terms of their total size requirements. So that'll be a growth area. And this just looks at square feet over time. Think of this as a nascent industry that's just starting to expand and grow up. So they were at less than 200,000 square feet in 2016 in San Francisco. Now they're at about 1.1. We think by the end of this year might be somewhere around 1.4, 1.5 million square feet. So we're going to see it continue growth in that perspective. And I'll leave with a happy note. is, there's a bunch of fancy economists in London that have fancy accents, and they do their forecast for every metro area in the United States. And in that evaluation, San Francisco Peninsula, or the San Francisco Metro, always is considered a shining star and still considered a shining star. So it's forecast to grow by 12% over the next 5 years, employment growth over 4%, similar to Silicon Valley. So yeah, we're not getting Austin's going faster, but in general, we are in a very strong position based on our industry.
Okay, thank you. Any specific questions for Kate or Quinn? Okay, John.
You said that the return to office, I think you said was 49%. Was that, how does that break out? Return to office, 2 days a week, return to office full time.
It varies from market to market, definitely. It's relative to that same week, so that first week in May in 2019. So it's not so much like X% of the office is occupied, it's more that 49%. Sorry, let me rephrase. In 2023, 49% of the badge swipes, people that came into the office were there relative to 2019, that same week.
And what percentage of offices do have the badge swipe? Yeah, it's really how representative is the sample in other words.
It's relatively small. It's all based off of Castle Systems. They haven't shared their number of buildings, but they do have a significant number in San Francisco. I think most of their inventory is in Chicago and New York, Dallas, Houston, the major areas.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the AI office space. Do you see any patterns or a type of office or general neighborhood they seem to be concentrated?
Yeah, so far I think we're hearing that they generally want to stay in the Mission area, which is fascinating to us because it's not a sizable office market. We are seeing that they'll continue to move, and there are anomalies to that, or there are exceptions to the rule. In terms of what type of office space they're looking for, other than traditional tech space, we heard initially, just based on the computational requirements, that they might need additional power, but that's not been the case so far. So far, what we understand is that they generally can go into any traditional tech office space, which is widely available in San Francisco.
Okay, just want to open this up for some conversation. We have a couple of questions, but this is, I think, a little bit of phenomena that we've all been trying to wrap our heads around. When we look at that employment number, San Francisco is employing, and these businesses are doing very well. The rest of San Francisco, I spent this weekend being a tourist in our own city, and the Presidio was packed. Fisherman's Wharf is packed. You've got to wait in line and make a reservation in some of our best restaurants. Even some of our not best restaurants, you have to make a reservation and wait in line. So it's quite interesting. I've always been curious how we are really different than other cities. And I've been curious about, it wasn't long before COVID that we were bragging about how many cranes were in the sky. And I'm curious about the office growth and production pre-COVID, the 7 years leading up to that. And we came off the biggest building boom. Does that play into where our vacancy is now? And did other cities have that same big growth boom in office production the way we did?
I can start and then, so there were other office markets that also saw and are continuing to see construction, Austin, New York, a little bit in Charlotte, I believe, Seattle. So there were towards the end of the tens or the teens, we started to see injection of inventory across many markets. I think what's fascinating about your first part of that question is, are the office numbers that different than, say, New York or Chicago or Boston? And Kate showed that spread. And honestly, the percentages aren't that different, but if you ask my brokers, they will tell you, boy, New York is just killing it. Why are we not New York? And you look at the stats, and that's not really what's happening at all. What happened in downtown San Francisco is that we have a monolith of office uses. And so the activity on the street always feels less than if you're in Manhattan. And that ultimately creates some of the perception that things are more dead when in fact, I think the numbers, and Kate, you can correct me, it's 44% in San Francisco, it's 50% in New York. So that's a 6 percentage point difference, but if you talk to the brokers, it's much worse.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. So we deal with BOMA associations around the country, right? So we talk to all the major markets. And what's kind of interesting to us is everybody's facing the same problem. San Francisco is unique in the sense, and I think when you articulated perfectly, there's not a lot of people in the downtown area, but in terms of leasing and people coming into the office, I'd say within 4 or 5 percentage points. I mean, we're pretty close to DC, Philadelphia, Chicago, takeout Texas, which I think is a bit of an anomaly in and of itself. San Francisco isn't in as much dire straits from an office perspective, but the downtown area just doesn't have any vibrancy. It leads to the impression that we're not doing well. And I think the impression will feed upon itself and ultimately becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, we've all done a little bit of travel recently in Portland, Seattle, the DC we've recently been in. They all feel like they have similar problems. I think the geographic, for anyone who's watching this, that's not from San Francisco, we are a tiny little city, 7 by 7, and the downtown core is probably 30 blocks by 30 blocks. So I think that concentration is part of the perception of the lack of activity. But as the data points out, these jobs are certainly producing these companies are producing. Want to ask you, John, we talked about and they shared some of the downsizing and maybe efficiency. What are some of the barriers potentially with TI improvements, maybe, and landlords having the opportunity to work with companies that might be looking at upgrading or downsizing or something?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I'll try to tackle it. I think that one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing right now is ground floor retail. If you look at the city and you kind of do a walk around, like that's the missing component. And that has a lot of extending kind of parameters to it, where if you don't have the restaurants, if you don't have the dry cleaners, if you don't have the things people need to come into the city, it creates an expectation that this isn't the city I want to be in. We have tried everything to help lease those spaces, to bring restaurants, to bring in all the small businesses. And the reality is it's a tough proposition. The build outs are incredibly high right now. If you look at just construction costs, the amount of time of permitting, our members have offered sweetheart deals to a lot of these places. In some cases, no, more often than not, some sort of percentage of sales. We're not expecting to make a ton of money off that, which is a shift in the dynamic of how we used to operate buildings. But now we're just trying to fill those spaces so we can create that vibrancy. In terms of the barriers, it's really cost. It's the downtown that we always see. It's, it's safety, it's clean and safe. It's all of the things we've been talking about. But until we get a handle on that, until we can bring in that ground floor, I think we're going to see this problem continue to get worse.
And how many industries, let's focus a little bit on emerging industries and attracting new business to San Francisco or businesses that could be growing like AI. I'm curious how many companies do you think couldn't afford San Francisco before, right? They're still in leases in maybe Oakland and maybe further out. Understand the data about people maybe migrating for their lifestyle outside of an urban area, but to really collect this talent, this intellectual talent, you want to be in the hub. What do you think that those growth areas are? Where are they now? Are they companies of 100 that are on a pathway to get to 300? We have to look at the VC funding, and I'm so curious where that's being placed. If you look back 2 years ago, was AI automation like, whoa, where's that? And so we see that here. So
definitely AI. I mean, we're seeing that a lot. I think there are some other firms that are dipping their toes into San Francisco based on the concept that they should get in on the basement with pricing as they are right now, especially there's some very affordable rates in certain markets. So if you did want to enter in right now, there's very tenant favorable environment. And this is a time for you to enter in one of the premier West Coast gateway markets in the country, if not the world. So I think there's an opportunity there. A lot of people who are wanting to integrate artificial intelligence into their business processes also might consider this location. So I think those are some of the reasons that you would come here. The other one would be clean tech, which is probably slowing down associated with the demise of Silicon Valley Bank. But we think long-term, that is a growth opportunity within San Francisco. And then finally, the third one is biotech, also going through similar pains, but we think that they long-term want to be in knowledge areas, and this is one of the knowledge capitals of the globe.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's exactly what we're seeing kind of around the city. AI's, technology reinvented. And that's the thing about technology in San Francisco is it means so many things to so many people. And one starts popping, that becomes the new technology and that can fill some space. So yeah, I think we're okay.
Question, Mike.
Yeah, so we hear a lot about employers wanting their employees back into the office for a variety of reasons. But right now, the employees have the most of the power, which is why we're seeing these low rates. We hear a lot about recession and how that may switch the power back to the employer, and then they can demand their employees back in the office. What do you think that would do to the return to office rates if we did get a recession and the employer had a little bit more power than the employees?
This is such a good question, and I don't have the answer. I mean, we think that the real lever to getting people back into the office is management having the authority to do so and wanting to do so. And we're seeing it in certain cases. So Kate mentioned this briefly, is roughly based on the Flosser AI data, it's Apple somewhere around 70% plus back at the station. In Meta, it's around 27%. So there's this wide variance across company, and that's driven, I think, mostly by leadership. So there's going to be some decisions made by individual companies that ultimately decide, whether they need to be in the office or not. That leverage point, though, is still an issue. Engineer unemployment rate is less than 2%. I believe it's less than 1%. So there's still leverage on the side of the engineers to essentially, decide, make the rules. And I just went into Splunk offices today at 270 Brandon, which is completely empty. And the place is gorgeous. Like, how do people not come back in the office? But there seems to be certain companies that have made that decision that they're going to be remote, at least remote first. And regardless of amenities, they're not necessarily going to come back. So it's really driven by the management decisions, and do they feel it's critical for them to develop their intellectual property within the office? And I think a lot of managers do believe that. It just requires leadership and a little bit of fortitude. But I agree with your question. If you're going to give me a percentage, like what's the proportion that we would apply? I really don't know, because there's, like I said, there's just such a wide variance between what Meta's doing and what Apple is doing. And they're hugely important to understanding what is the return to office environment will be.
Something also to take into consideration is kind of the overarching tech culture that was put in place pre-pandemic. Kind of the expectations that many employees in some of these major tech companies came to expect in terms of not only amenities, but flexibility with their employer. That's a much bigger change to make post-pandemic than I think other industries tend to anticipate. I mean, just taking, for example, in real estate, employers was different than I think in most other industries. Take that into account.
The only thing I think I can add is we've been in a lot of economic downturns a lot. We know what they are, we know what they look like. They happen every 10 to 15 years in commercial real estate, and smart people can kind of set their watch by it. What's different this time is there's a human shift or a shift in human behavior that we don't know how to do. And we've never before seen people say, we don't want to come in the office, we don't have to come in the office. And there's no way for us to figure out from an economic standpoint how do we model that into this downturn? But that's the challenge. That's what we're all waiting on. It needs to kind of fix itself. And once it does, then we're gonna have a new ground floor and be able to make predictions. But until that happens, I don't know how to get past
Is anybody tracking salaries based on remote work? For example, we saw 2012-14 in Silicon Valley, salaries went up like crazy, right? I mean, Google, and simply based on one fact. They couldn't find employees, so they were leaving, and everybody went from, engineers from 180,000, 360,000 and so on. And I've posted on this a number of times. Remote work's got to have an impact on salary ranges, because why do you pay somebody $260,000 in the Bay Area when you can have $430,000 in Ohio or $90,000 in Ireland? Is anybody tracking how remote work has affected salary ranges in general?
That's, it's a good question. I think, in Colorado, they have to post the salary band in their advertising. That's a place. So if you're remote, I don't think you have the same requirement. So we don't see that variance. It obviously makes sense that that would be the case, but I don't know if I could, say it's a 30% difference between in-person and remote. I can tell you that the share of remote work job postings has gone down since this last quarter. So I'm doing this off memory. I think it was 18%. Now it's down to 14%. But it's come down slowly. Where remote work job postings have come down.
Some firms announced that they have no longer remote.
Right.
I think it's also just a really hard thing to track as well, to get solid data on salaries for remote employees, since there isn't a location in many situations associated with that.
We don't have any data. I mean, our members are all operators and owner of commercial real estate, and most of those jobs have been, you need to be in your office. You can't really operate buildings from a remote location in any significant way. And so we're seeing all of our members continuing to come to these buildings because they have to. We need to keep them running.
Another tough question, but maybe a little follow-up to yours. I'm curious the people who left and the people who stayed. And we always talk about the advantage that San Francisco has of intellectual capital. Those who are working out of Reno right now, are they the kind of creative, high-level intellectual capital? Or is that still in San Francisco, but someone who's doing the coding is maybe in Reno or Durango, Colorado?
Ted Egan put some stuff. Ted Egan is the head of Office of Economic Analysis for the city of San Francisco. He did some migration stats that showed that higher income households in the last 2021 numbers were leaving San Francisco for the first time, not like in 2019 and 2018, where we saw mostly middle income and lower income households leaving San Francisco. So the point was that those are skilled workforce. That's a labor force that we want to retain within San Francisco. The labor force numbers do not reflect this massive migration. And this is what Kate was just showing. Is it 3,000? So that's your unemployment record, whether you're employed or you're unemployed or you're looking for labor. So we're down 3,000 from February of 2020. That means that our labor force is still here. We just haven't seen that massive outflow that we're talking about. I think we were seeing people who are families and individuals that were retired, decide they want to be outside of San Francisco. But the reality is we haven't lost as much of a labor force as you would think. And it implies to me that the tech worker is still here. Based on all the stats that we can look at, still looks like we are a huge concentration of a knowledge economy. We're still the preeminent leader in this market, and that really hasn't meaningfully changed.
And maybe the VC funding landing in San Francisco supports it.
Yeah, you'd think. I mean, so we talk about, here are the most important growth verticals in technology. It goes AI, clean tech, blockchain. I'm missing one. It's logistics, e-commerce logistics. those four, if you look at in VC funding of those four, you know who has the highest concentration? San Francisco, by a long shot. So the areas that we expect the most growth are the area that's getting the most investment is in San Francisco, according to PitchBook. And I didn't make this up. I wasn't like trying to, get the numbers correct to show San Francisco in a higher light. That's just what the numbers are showing.
Jay, you had a question there?
Yeah, is anyone defining or working on defining, measuring the protocols of productivity when people are in the office or when they aren't? And also specifically, we've had a history where people are remote, but know the people they're working with. Eventually attrition and so forth will change that. And so now we have people working with people they don't identify with, don't have relationships. Is anyone or should someone be trying to measure this?
Yes. And I think we're gonna start seeing some of those reports. I think some of the major tech firms have started looking at that. I believe I heard that Apple had a study which tried to show that same correlation between productivity being fully remote versus working with people inside. I think that's the next step in the conversation from an employer's point of view. I think you're gonna start seeing these studies come out in the next year or so, and then that's gonna contribute to the ongoing dialogue of where should workers be housed, at home, at work, or some combination of both.
Yeah, and we're tracking patent applications at a US level, and they are way down in relationship to previous post-road recession events. So if you look at a curve, usually after every recession, there's a growth in intellectual property patents. And you would look at the great financial crisis, .com era, et cetera. That has not happened this time. So we think that there is a knowledge lag associated with not interacting within the office. And as I always say, you tell me the greatest idea that was created out of a Zoom. I don't know one. And I hear walks by, what does it say? I'm from OpenAI or something. I do not hear about, I had this amazing Zoom call and we came up with this magnificent Gmail concept. I mean, I just don't hear it. So I think it's a water cooler argument. The biggest statement I've ever heard is the most productive time of any meeting is the 5 minutes after the meeting. And I don't know how you create that in the Zoom environment.
We can see that, I think here in the meetings we have at the chamber on Zoom as opposed to the ones we used to have in this room, which were very dynamic. And the pre-meeting and the post-meeting were often the most productive times in the whole hour.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. It might have been the wine and cheese that made that a little bit. But yeah, it was a
Where is the wine, Rodney?
It's early, but we've been trying to have the majority of our meetings in person here, obviously getting a hybrid option, but you're right, it's that collaboration that we're doing right now. Emily, do you have?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat I want to make sure we get to. This is a topic that we've chatted a lot about, but still relevant, converting vacant office into residential. But another part of the question that maybe you could elaborate on is if that is on the table or maybe other conversions, is there a particular spot or geographical area in San Francisco that those testing conversions would be good?
Sure. Spur has been doing a lot of analysis on this specifically. They are going a deep dive with Ginsler and a number of other participants in that effort. So I would suggest you look at what they've done already on this path. What we're finding is generally, one, the basis of the property has to be incredibly low to justify the conversion. Two, the specific building characteristics have to allow for that to occur. And then three, there has to be things on the side of government that enables that conversion more readily. And what I mean by that is there are a bunch of impact fees in that conversion that could be assessed on a conversion. And if those are excluded, that would further increase the feasibility of it. But those three elements are hugely important. We think it's good. We want to see it happen, but it's only going to happen to a select few of buildings. Yeah.
I was gonna say the same thing. I think it's an important mix as we look at a new San Francisco or revitalizing San Francisco. But I don't think it's going to be in such a dramatic effect that it's gonna solve either the housing crisis or it's gonna solve the new vacancy problem that we're having in commercial real estate. But I am hopeful that it will change kind of the dynamic of the downtown and help bring more people down here. But we imagine that's much more of a mid to long-term proposition.
Okay, well, thank you all. On that last part, we've been advocating to City Hall to think about policy, and our team here with all of the other business organizations have been making recommendations, Advance SF, Chamber of Commerce, Spur, SF Travel, we've all been putting our heads together and making recommendations to the mayor's office for that. So hopefully some of this data starts to come to policies then becomes incentives for either property owners or tenants to get off the ball and start taking some chances on San Francisco. I'll kind of close very quickly, putting my Chamber of Commerce hat on for a second. It is a beautiful day in San Francisco. This is a beautiful city. Long-term bullish for this city. I know we've got some short-term problems. We tend to look at things in 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter aspects, but you think you have to look at San Francisco from a decades long of success, and we will just be just fine. We're going to be a little bit different, and there's some immediate needs now. But San Francisco, if you're watching this, it probably is not exactly what you're seeing on TV and national news. We are experiencing a great lifestyle here. I have a suntan this weekend. I'm spending a little too much time at Kissy Field with the dogs. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us. And we will look forward to our next connection with the data deep dive. Thanks very much.
Thank you.